great to see you all, and thank you all for being here this evening. And so I'm so thrilled to have actually all of the artists here in full attendance, and thank you all for joining us. My name's Shauna McCabe, and I'm the director of the Art Gallery of Guelph, and I'd like to welcome you all, as well as our guests, Devine, Bea Parsons, Katherine Takpannie, Pottle, and Ruth Cuthand. And I really look forward to our dialogue this evening. To begin, I'd like to offer land acknowledgement on behalf of the Art Gallery of Guelph, which is hosting this dialogue tonight, and where I am, and our assistant Tristan Parfect is, who's handling some of the technology tonight. The statement is crucial for cultural institutions, as a land acknowledgement confronts the ongoing effects of colonialism that underpin the history of art museums and museums. And not only have cultural institutions been and utilized deeply colonial methods of representation, but because of the authority of these institutions, they've been accepted as truth, often informing policies and practices. So Guelph, Ontario is located on treaty land that is steeped in rich Indigenous history and home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people today. And as we gather here this evening, we'd like to acknowledge that we reside on the ancestral lands of the Adirondack people, and more recently the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. We recognize the significance of the Dish with One Spoon covenant to this land and offer our respect to our Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Métis neighbors as we strive to strengthen our relationships with them. We express gratitude and recognize our responsibility for the stewardship of the land on which we live, work, and create. And as we're gathered here virtually today, connected and yet physically dispersed, it is also a good moment to recognize how the different traditional lands we reside in and move through every day inform our lives. And we acknowledge the elders past, present, and future of these lands with gratitude and respect. A few details. Everyone has been muted for this conversation who's listening, and we would like to invite you to use the chat area for questions as they come up, and I know they will. We'll turn to those after the conversation, just to sort of keep things focused on the images we'll be looking at. And I wanted to just sort of explain the context for this exhibition called Vectors of Transmission, and which is still on at the Art Gallery of Guelph until Sunday. So you have a few more days to check it out if you're in the area. The other exhibition we also have up currently is called Breathe, and that also deals with the pandemic. And Vectors of Transmission really started with a question. And I'm always interested in having our exhibitions really play a role in public discourse. And so, you know, as we're making decisions about what we're doing at the Art Gallery of Guelph at any given point, our goal is to be responsive and relevant. That's sort of always sort of the big picture. And when the pandemic began, I was looking for artists who were working in relationship to what was happening around us. And so work that was speaking to the condition that we were collectively experiencing from their own very distinct perspectives. And I'm sure as you go to art museums and art galleries, you can see how often it's quite easy to basically indicate that nothing in the world has changed. Exhibition programs often stay the same. And, you know, basically what I was interested in is an intent on providing a platform basically for the work that did engage this transformation of the world that we've all experienced and that the virus instigated. And given the devastating effects of pandemics more broadly on Indigenous communities historically, I was particularly interested in providing space for the work and perspectives of Indigenous artists. And that's basically how it started. In the process of doing that research, I did select these 5 artists and invite them actually to create work in some cases for this exhibition. And that produced the Vectors of Transmission project that is on view here. It was also developed and presented with the support of the Creating in the Time of Coronavirus, which is a funding source that was offered through the University of Guelph to support these kinds of research projects. So what I'm going to do now is, just before we go into looking at the artwork, I'm just going to provide a little bit of a biography for each artist. And if you do want more information, there's longer bios on our the Vectors of Transmission page on our website. But just to give you a sense of who the artists are and a little bit about their backgrounds. Most of these come from their artist statements, so they're sort of kind of a reflection of how they frame their work as well. So Ruth Cuthand is a mixed media artist with Plains Cree, Scottish and Irish ancestry, who is based in Saskatoon currently. Her first art materials as a child included the orange paper discarded from Polaroid chest x-rays that students were subjected to in routine tuberculosis screenings near Alberta's Blood 148 First Nations Reserve. And so this sort of provoked her early fascination with disease and Indigenous living conditions and settler native relationships. And this has remained key to her ongoing artistic practice. And as you'll see, traditional beadwork actually plays a big part of her work today, and looking at the impacts of colonization on Indigenous people around the country. Bonnie Devine is a member of the Serpent River First Nation, an Anishinaabe Ojibwe territory located on Lake Huron's northern shore. And although formerly educated in sculpture and installation, which she's done in many, many locations across the country in the United States, much of her lessons and learning came from the upbringing and her grandparents, who worked as trappers, and her work emerged from their connection to the land and storytelling traditions of her Anishinaabe ancestors, drawing upon Ojibwe mythology and image-making traditions to explore issues of land, environment, treaty, and narrative. She's also an associate professor emerita and the founding chair of the Indigenous Visual Culture Program at OCAD University. Bea Parsons is a visual artist based in Montreal, where she was the 2020 Artist in Residence at Concordia University. Her drawings and paintings and prints that you'll see tonight integrate elements of both abstraction as well as narrative, with references to the natural world and representations of femininity and ideas of freedom as well as surveillance, as you'll see. Barry Pottle is an Inuk artist from Nunavut in Labrador, now living in Ottawa. His practice is really photo-based and uses photography as a medium of artistic expression and as a way of exploring the uniqueness of our everyday environments. He began a position as an at-home Indigenous artist in residence at SAW Gallery at the Nordic Lab there in 2020. And although he's known best for his photographic work that documents everyday life, this residency has really allowed him to explore sort of more multidisciplinary directions as well. And Katherine Takpannie is an urban Inuk whose family is originally from Apex Hill in Nunavut. She is a self-taught emerging photographer, revealing the complexities and nuances of urban Inuit life in Ottawa. And she's also an alumnus of the Nunavut Sivinik program. I was trying that earlier, designed to empower Inuit youth through rigorous academic and as well as experiential learning. And in that program, she focused on the Nunavut Agreement and its implementation, researching historical Inuit government relations. So that's some background for you all. And now I'm just going to share a screen here. So here you go. And so perhaps we can start with just looking at the exhibition and sort of looking at each of your work in the exhibition. And if I can ask you to talk about the work that you have on view and what prompted it, and how does it also relate to your practice more broadly? And I thought I'd start with this image, actually, and Bonnie Devine. This was actually the image that, an image that she posted on Facebook at sort of early on in the pandemic, and it was called Vectors of Transmission. And I got in touch immediately, and I said, I want you in this show, and can we use that as the title of the exhibition? Which she so generously allowed. And so just go forward here. So here is her work, which actually entails both of these images. Here they are: vectors of transmission, Windigo, trials of solidarity, as well as bookworks. And these are journals that she has many journals and allowed these two to be in the exhibition. And what she also told me, and Bonnie, you can talk about this, is the image that you had posted on Facebook was actually this size of an image. So in order to create work for the exhibition, it required sort of transforming it. So maybe you could talk about that. You might be on mute, actually.
Okay. I think the thing that really struck me about COVID at the very beginning was how impossible it was to comprehend what was actually facing us. And that was early on. And I realized that I didn't even really know what a virus was, you know, what its properties were, how it actually attacked us. I didn't know anything about it really. Of course, I'd heard the word virus and had many viruses in my life, and I knew, you know, all of that stuff. But when I probed my knowledge a little bit deeper, I realized how very little I really knew. And so these journals and the little drawings that are in the journals are really my attempt to learn about COVID-19, and particularly about this idea that this little monster is prowling around in the community and getting into us somehow, and then hurting us when it gets into us. And that idea was very transfixing to me. And so I am still engaged in writing down everything I can find out about the research that's going into the pandemic, the medical measures that are being taken around the world, the various medicines and vaccines, the development of the vaccine, all this kind of really terrifying knowledge that was bombarding us every day. And a lot of it in terms that I for one, didn't have the background or the education to understand what they were talking about. So, so these little books are my way of recording this journey of knowledge as the pandemic and the global response to it educated me, and I guess everybody, to just how vulnerable and unprepared we are, and how dependent we are on systems that, once again, we don't really understand how they work, how they communicate together, you know, what the economies of those systems are, or anything. So yeah, those are what the journals are about.
The larger works, did you pull these from the small images?
Yes, I had made, I was engaging in a process of printmaking. And so the images in the little books are prints and collages. And the printmaking was important to me because I was thinking about this idea of propinquity, you know, how close this thing gets to us, that it's so close that it actually penetrates the skin, or penetrates the tissue, penetrates us on a cellular level. And the print seemed to me to be a way to talk about that or feel that in my body as I was exploring this phenomenon.
And are you getting the details from so some of it seems like it's from the news, things you're reading, some things you're viewing?
Absolutely. I became a complete junkie to find out as much as I could. So I was looking at various YouTube channels, a couple in particular from Great Britain, where they seem to have people who I trusted. So I was staying away from, you know, crackpots, which there was a lot of, and trying to stay with educators doctors and medical people who were trying to figure it out at the same time that we are trying to figure it out, but had an edge because they had a epidemiological background or a background in public health. And so they understood, you know, things like R value or I can't even, like, I'm so nervous, I can't even remember some of the terms, but there were all these terms that were being thrown at us that I just didn't know what they were. And I felt like in order to survive this thing, I needed to know some of what it all meant.
Mhm.
So yeah, a lot of this is research data that's been gathered by other people, talking about how this thing actually replicates. Like, what is exponential growth? What does that mean? And how can you map that out? Things like that.
And you feel like you've learned.
Well, not really. I mean, you know, there's still so much that is opaque about what's really going on. And you know, with the introduction of the vaccination, that's a whole set of books that aren't even in this particular grouping. But once the vaccination was developed, like, how does that work?
Mhm.
You know, what's an RNA vaccine? And then the whole reaction to that, and which is still going on. You know, really fascinating stuff.
And how many books do you have now?
I have 8 now.
Okay.
They're quite laborious to produce because I have to figure out what to put in them. There's so much, like, the information is not getting any less. So, and I don't know why it's important to me to have all this information on hand, but I really did want to have it kind of in a small portable format that I could leaf through and refer to as things were developing.
And do you find, you know, the cataloging, the sort of impulse to catalog and to, you know, create these records, is that sort of part of your practice generally?
Yes, I have. I have been keeping a journal for almost my whole life, and a lot of my work comes out of my journals, and a lot of, well, I think that quite a few artists work that way, you know, where events kind of coalesce into images, and then those images coalesce into works. And so who knows where the inspiration is, but yeah, a lot of what I have been working on for, I would say, the last 30 years comes from an intense writing practice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mapping too, I think.
Yeah, because, you know, like for me, writing and sort of analyzing the situation around us is about mapping and locating ourselves temporally and geographically. And so the writing really is a way for me to do that every day. And these journals, they really are a way for me to locate myself within this global thing that we're experiencing right now.
Okay, I'm not sure how many of these we have, but I'll just go through them, and then maybe we can come back to this in a little bit. I just find them so fascinatingly dense.
They're dense, I know. It's obsession.
Yeah, and the numbers and the.
Yeah, and every day, you know, I would record the number of new cases and the number of deaths. And I tried to break it down, you know, in different countries, and particularly in terms of Canada. And then more recently, I've been mapping that in terms of the provinces, because the lens is more, sort of less focused on the global drama and more on the local drama. So hospitalizations and, you know, critical benchmarks in terms of the number of patients and the number of healthcare workers and all of that kind of thing. So it's all part of it.
Okay, now we're on to Bea's work. Thanks, Bonnie.
You're welcome.
Bea. So this is these are works by Bea Parsons. And if you want to unmute, if you're there, Bea. Are you there? Okay.
Yeah, I unmuted. Thank you.
And we've got the individual works here. We ended up selecting 3 for the exhibition: Practice and Pantheon and Firsthand Witness. So do you want to talk about this work?
Sure. I am a visual artist. I been creating monoprints exclusively for a few years now. I was a painter who was really caught between painting and drawing and never quite figuring out how to do either. I wasn't really able to paint how I drew and draw how I paint. And storytelling for me is very part of my work. I make work that is narrative driven. Even if there isn't a full story with an arc that takes place in my work, I need a story happening in my head. It's how I make sense of things, and it's very embedded in me, how knowledge is passed and philosophy is taught. So I had these, anyway, going back to the monotype, I find drawing so related to storytelling and thinking and how fast it moves communication and ideas out of the hands. But at the same time, I had an interest in painterly mark making, and the two didn't go together. I couldn't paint as fast as I thought. I couldn't paint as fast as a story goes through my mind. But I liked that problem. I could have just drawn, but I like problems. And I just was lucky enough to have a colleague point out to me a few years ago, monoprinting. And they said, Bea, you might like monoprinting. It's fast, it's quick, it's on paper. Just try it, you know? And I think just having a very playful approach to trying something new, like it just blew my mind. So I like monoprinting using this tonal black and white scale because I can use painterly marks and move around and work quickly, and omitting color kind of speeds up the process for me, you know, because choosing colors and palettes is a whole decision-making process. So this links me back to just the immediacy of drawing, yeah, while still being able to use all these skills I developed and learned over the years as a painter. So monoprinting, this work is from a series around the time year ago. I created a series called Payak, which is the Cree word for the number 1 in English. And I just call it Payak because it was one place where I could both paint and draw. And monoprints are silly. You just make one. And I often feel very at home. I feel at home with myself. But when you get into identity and background, you know, you kind of ask to be separated, like my Cree half, my Scottish half. And I said, Payak, you know, it's sort of a way to just like be one thing, you know, just see myself as a, you know, as a whole person. And so that was the series of work I was making around this time last year. I made a lot of the work during the pandemic. I was fortunate to be a member at a print shop that where I was able to access. We had quite a few lockdowns in the city where I live, and not a lot of access, but fortunately my print shop was considered a factory. It's weird to think of a little art factory, but we were able to slip between the cracks, and I was able to go and make work. That said, it was a very isolated period, and I was thinking a lot about interactions and communication. Also spent a great deal of the pandemic looking for things to do. I'm a curious person, and I was on my phone learning Duolingo, learning French because of where I live in Quebec, and was learning my mom's first language, Cree, and being online, you know, looking for things to do, I was meeting and connecting with people a lot more. I took Cree lessons with Ruben Quinn at the Center for Race and Culture in Edmonton. Oh gosh, time is a flat circle right now. I was taking those lessons a year ago. I started in November. So anyway, language and communication and, you know, stories and just also being really in a strange situation, you know, collectively with everyone, and, you know, checking in with relatives I wasn't in contact with as much before, you know, texting, checking in every day. You know, remaining in contact with people, if not more so, in a certain way, through technology, and out of just a need to care. So this piece we're looking at, I was kind of repeating these faces interacting with each other. It's called Pantheon because I was just thinking about sort of a lot of stories and myth and trying to make sense of things. I had a lot of faces talking to one another, interacting with each other, and thinking of the pantheon as like a collection of deities and gods and spirits, and how I was just sort of going back through a lot of ideas about creation and how things make sense through stories and how things are going to look, you know, 100 years from now. Like, how are we going to make sense of this current moment in a mythological sense down the road? Was kind of always interested in the idea of time and what gets repeated. So that's sort of a general background of all the things that were going on. I guess Pantheon too is just stuffing everything in, you know. It was sort of my personal response was to fill up time and space with being creative, and you know, going back to, I mean, part of being an artist is spending a lot of time alone and devoting yourself to your craft. And, you know, the time spent during the pandemic was a natural impulse, you know, go into the studio and work. One thing I was going to say too, I was spending a lot of time in this interface.
Oh.
We're all like in the screen. I'm actually embarrassed because I meant to switch my background. That's the institution where I work. I was teaching a drawing class earlier. I wanted something more artsy. It's not the best. Anyway, I was talking about screens and how we're interacting, and formally I was playing with the flatness of this space and the picture plane and what we're allowed to stare at, and how we interact with people right now through these interfaces. Again, using a very immediate, personal, tactile thing like moving ink around on a piece of plexiglass. You know, I thought about that quite a bit in regard to learning languages and why. I think it's really important to ask yourself why you're learning a language, and who you want to talk to and what you want to say and why you find it exciting. You know, you have to want to, you know, it's art, you have to feel that genuine pull. So I was moving around in that, but you know, working with the flatness of the paper and the flatness, moving out of rendered textures, and then kind of like a comic book line. You know, a lot of that was kind of changed with the Zoom, looking at Zoom. That piece of the little person looking out the window, I made that in January 2020, and it felt so strange because 2 months or 3 months later, we were all, that's how I felt. It felt like a little premonition. I was thinking about other things. I was thinking about the artist and the first sort of marks you lay down on a piece of paper or a notebook or, like whatever you're starting with, and how you're the first one there to see it. And this particular print has a bit of the process revealed. I tend to really decorate and fill things with flowers and eyes and characters. And this one, I just wanted to let the brayer brush or the roller and let some of the process let itself known. And so it's just a little figure inside the artwork looking at how it's made. But, context is everything. And it was the beginning of this this series. And, a few months later, we were all kind of cautiously watching and peering out. And there was the hazard, the unknown. So
That's
it's
great.
funny it ended up in this exhibition and this conversation, because it's a bit of a premonition.
Yeah. That's great. Well, thanks, Bea. That's
Thanks
great.
for having me.
Yes. Well, thank you for talking about it. It actually clarifies so much. So it's always good to hear more. So now we've got Katherine's work. And this, I know, is part of this series, and we've got each individual work here. Ones we selected were quite specific and quite intentional from the overall set. But Katherine, maybe you can talk about the series and sort of the context, and also it really reminds us of how so many things have intersected in the last year.
Definitely. Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. First off, I would love to say that as an Inuk who has lived in Ottawa, a lot of my practice is based on the Ottawa that I see through my lens. A lot of my work is just an extension of myself. This was the March for Justice when the pandemic first hit, and after the killing of George Floyd, the global movement. I as a BIPOC woman, I stand in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement, and I wanted to be able to capture everything that the cumulative effects of the racially profiled violence against Black people. As Bea was mentioning, while we were in the pandemic, everyone was connecting and looking at the rest of the world through our screens, through our computers, through our tablets, our phones, laptops. The devastation when we all saw that video globally and collectively, there was the largest movement for the Black Lives Matter. And I really wanted to stand in solidarity. I wanted to capture people's emotions, how the outrage, the disgust, the complete and utter. I saw signs that mothers were holding that said, when George Floyd called for his mother, all mothers were summoned. Or if someone says, I can't breathe, you help them. It was a very poignant and important moment in history. And I just wanted to be a part of that. I wanted to be there and stand in solidarity.
And you've been documenting protests, protests are and sort of critical moments like that, I guess, that are full of kind of tension and energy are quite often your subject.
Definitely. I first started my career with the Art Gallery of Guelph. My images of a pro ceiling rally in 2018 was actually my first exhibit. And it's it's policies that completely affect everyone, that there needs to be a collective power in using our voices to speak up against the injustices that we face. And it's really important to me that I attend these protests and I use my voice and I use my camera and I share with the world what I can, as well as everyone else. Just contribute to equality for all. As the picture says, there's a lot of importance in using your voice.
And what I noticed that you have a new series, Resilience.
It's actually the Resilience series is where I have a lot of my documentary work, in all avenues.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Katherine.
Thank you.
And now Barry. So we have this series of sea prints, and as well one other work separately. So this is Monkey See, Monkey Do, and Monkey Die. And we do have this work as well. This is actually the first work that I had noticed by Barry, and that's when I got in touch, my COVID colors, simply because, and it's funny how the mask has become such a central element of a lot of work around the pandemic, whether making them or representing them. And just sort of, in this case, the images of this very everyday fabric and textiles being used. And then Barry sort of documenting them as we often see them now on the ground. So Barry, do you want to talk about that?
Okay, thanks. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I mean, originally when the pandemic started, I wasn't planning on doing anything related to the pandemic whatsoever. It took me about 1.5 years, I think, just to get into it. And then I had an opportunity through the AGO and through the Ottawa Public Art Program there to do some work and to explore this topic. And what I basically came up with is just a visual diary of what's going on around me, my neighborhood, in and around my neighborhood, and just a little beyond. Very early on, when the pandemic started, my wife and I used to go out and do walk around the neighborhood, walk around our own neighborhood, just to get out and get some fresh air and just getting cooped up all the time. So that we'd go out and we'd walk, and I started taking my camera. And it was about 1.5 years in before I really started looking at the idea of doing some work with respect to the pandemic. And really what started was I was walking with my wife, and I was looking at the rooftops, the roofs of buildings. And I was looking at it, I was wondering if anybody's ever done any work with respect to roofs, that sort of stuff, right? So I said, taking pictures of roofs. But that's really where it started, the idea of getting back into the creative process again, because for about 1.5 years, I wasn't creating anything, and we just responding to the pandemic on daily life in terms of being safe and family being safe and everything else around it. And then my wife, her friend created all those masks, and we bought them from her. And at the time, I wasn't really taking the mask thing seriously until it really started to be promoted. And the mask, I just wanted to see if I could actually photograph them in some kind of I guess visual format. And I started photographing them. This is actually the cushion is from my seat, lawn seat. So I put them on that because it's really bright and really nice, and I really love color. And I wanted to try and enhance the mask, the colors of the mask. But also wanted to see if I could actually photograph them in a legitimate and artistic expression, view, I guess. And so I photographed them in various settings and whatnot. With here you have the elastics out representing people putting the mask on or who would put them on, right? But I got all these, we got all these masks, and I loved the colors of them and whatnot. And so I started photographing them, and then it was just part of the overall visual diary that I was taking, going out in the neighborhood, and especially taking pictures of people with masks on and in the neighborhood walking around, and people responding to that, right? So, and then these monkey see, monkey do, monkey die was a result of when the masks really started coming into play, and I noticed when I was out grocery shopping and whatnot, I noticed that they were all over the ground. People just threw them around without any kind of disregard for human safety and cleanliness and littering and that. But I wanted to see if I could create something that can be impactful with it, make an impact with respect to the disregard of public safety, I think, and health issues and everything around that, right? So I looked at that, and monkey see, monkey do, and monkey die came into my mind as I was going around looking at masks, and the first two masks are actually on hospital grounds. Actually, my wife was in the hospital last very early on in 2020, and so I was over helping her and whatnot, and I noticed the masks were on the hospital grounds as well. So the first two I took them on, they were actually on hospital grounds, right? So there's a little bit of I don't know what's the word here, contradiction, I guess, or whatever, right? And the other one, the monkey die, is actually on the road. I wanted to show the visual representation of some sort of death or some sort of effect of these masks thrown around, disregarded, and disregard to public safety, right? So that's where those come. The idea for those three pieces came into play, but it all stems from a visual diary I did of taking pictures out around my neighborhood, at whether it's people out walking around or whether it's people have created signs in support of public professional workers and the healthcare frontline workers and that, as well as people putting things out on their lawn in response to the virus and the pandemic. Some that are humorous and sort of fun to look at, and just alleviate some stresses and some anxiety in the neighborhood, right? So that's where that comes from. That my work with respect to contribution to this year's show.
And I know that, so I first encountered your work just a couple of years ago when Takpannie Partridge curated a show here, because it was January last year, and she had included artists, or well, not artists, but also non-artists, based on sort of the images, photographs that they were using and sharing on social media, and kind of the sort of documentary quality of our everyday life now. And she was emphatic that you be included, and we had another set of work. So I do know that sort of capturing everyday life and just, you know, sort of the lived environment is a really big part of your work.
Yes. I was trying to figure out how to do that. I mean, like I said, I wasn't intending on doing any kind of thing with respect to the pandemic, but I just didn't want to copycat people were doing. I mean, I seen images on everywhere of people with downtown out and about with masks on and that sort of stuff. So I didn't really want to try and copy what other people were doing. I just wanted to do my own conceptions and create something that responds to my own personal, I think, endeavors and thoughts on within the pandemic, And my work is very contemporary. I call it contemporary urban Inuit art photography. I am in Ottawa. We have a huge Inuit population, so I try and highlight some of the vibrancy and some of the events and things that pertain to Inuit urban Inuit life here in Ottawa. So that's the crux of my work over the last, since I've been doing this.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
And finally, last but not least, Ruth Cuthand. And I guess when I started thinking about this exhibition, I knew that Ruth had to be in the exhibition. Ruth's work has often dealt with disease and virus and the impact on Indigenous communities. And, you know, just I actually wondered as soon as the pandemic hit, I thought Ruth is going to address that, I'm sure. And so when we were putting together this exhibition, we actually were able to borrow 2 works that were in private and public collections, the University of Regina, as well as a private collector in Saskatoon. So Ruth, do you want to talk about this series?
Yeah, as you mentioned, I've been beating diseases, viruses for, I think it's over 15 years. And so when the news came out of Wuhan, China, I was like, a pandemic? We're gonna have a pandemic? I was like, yeah, I'm a nerd. So every day I was on News World watching, okay, is he gonna say it today? Is Trudeau gonna say we have a pandemic? And, you know, I kept watching the numbers and how everything was happening. And then one day he said it and I was so excited. It's just like, oh, I didn't know it was going to be like this. So, you know, I thought a pandemic would be more exciting. So I started beating the microscopic views of the virus. And those sold out quickly. And I'm always trying to think of ways to make my work a little more inexpensive so ordinary people can afford it. And so I thought, okay, masks. And so I ordered masks. And so I was trying to figure out, like, what am I going to do? And so I beaded 2 viruses that match, put them on the mask, and it's kind of like that the virus can't penetrate the mask. It just stays on the surface, and talking about it as like a barrier to the disease. I just love disease. I don't even know where to go with it. It's like, I have such an excitement.
What about the connection between the bead particularly and that history of pandemic and virus?
My you called my beadwork traditional, but it's not. It's contemporary beadwork. Yeah, yeah. And when I started, I had to teach a beading class at First Nations University of Canada on the Saskatoon campus. And I was trying to think of a way for students to be engaged in beading, because we often think of beading as a design and the colors are set and, you know, you bead it. And I wanted a way for students to be more engaged. So I actually had them pick a painting. And Norvell Morso was like, he lent himself to beads really well. And so they beaded these paintings and they had to think about color. They had to think about, is this color going to fit here? You know, the size of the bead related relative to the image. And so they did that. And I was like beading and I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my practice. And I wanted to bead something. Anyway, one day I was looking at my beads and they're so shiny and depth of color and they're so gorgeous. And I started thinking about the first Indigenous women who actually saw beads and like how they would have been blown away by the bead. And then I started thinking about trade, because they came, you know, from Europe and were a massive trade item. And then so then I started thinking about the diseases that came, and then I looked them up on the microscopic level, and there were these gorgeous images of microscopic views of viruses. And it's like, oh my God, they're gorgeous. They're so abstract. It's like, so I started beating diseases, and the first series I did was called the Trading Series. And then I wanted to keep doing the the project. So then I moved into reserving, which is like when, and I'm from Western Canada, I'm from Saskatchewan. So I picked like the year that my band signed Treaty 6 and forward to the discovery of HIV when that was called the reserving period, which is a lot of respiratory illnesses and stuff related to malnutrition. And then, so when they discovered HIV, forward was when I've been doing more contemporary beading. Mm-hmm. And so when COVID hit, it was just like, wow, I was made for this. So yeah, I couldn't believe the reaction to it. Everybody wanted a COVID piece. And I'm actually working on a giant piece, 5 by 5 foot virus that is made out of size 8 transparent beads. Mm-hmm. And it's for, there's going to be an international bead show at the Mackenzie in May 22. Mm-hmm. And so this is actually, I have 3 beaders working on it. It's the, what do you call it? Brick stitch. And I'm not good at, I like to bead onto something, not the, what they call bead weaving, but they're going to make it, it's going to be huge and I'm going to backlight it. And I'm hoping that we can like, it'll throw color shadows onto the floor. And for every Indigenous, Inuit, and Métis person that's died in the pandemic, I'm going to put a red bead. And so I'll have red fringe hanging from it. It's sort of a memorial to COVID. But unfortunately, I live in Saskatchewan. We have the worst numbers of any place in Canada. And on bad days, I think this is going to go on for at least 5 more years. So on good days, I think, oh, another year. So I don't know when this is going to be over.
No, that's the thing, I guess. No. Thanks, Ruth. And I think that kind of leads into the next question. And actually, I'll stop sharing here for a second because we've seen all the work. So maybe we can have more of a conversation. And so, you know, one thing I also noticed was that throughout all of your work, there's this documentary element, really capturing aspects of the pandemic. And that's sort of really ranges for all of you in terms of your approach. And at the same time, you're all clearly addressing these larger issues, like Ruth has just been talking about, this, you know, the connection between, you know, beads and the introduction of beads and viruses, and then, you know, the impact on Indigenous communities. So this, basically, you're all sort of looking at these issues like the ongoing effects of colonization and the need for social change, right? And the need for change in our everyday lives and at a larger scale in terms of communities. And I just wonder if, you know, you might want to talk about how your practice has allowed you to reflect on those issues. I know all of you have dealt with it in very different ways, different scales and different ways. So who would like to go? How about Bonnie? Oh, very distant. There you go.
For me, I think it's more of, I think for me over the last little while is how disconnected I became from everybody and every day, sitting here in my computer office / studio and not being able to connect with people properly or in a safe environment. And so the challenges and reflecting upon those challenges, and even my cultural practices as well. I mean, it's gone way down because of this, right? There's no way to get together in a safe environment. I think it's slowly starting to come open a bit now, but for me, it's just reflecting on that and how to deal with it, how to get past being isolated and being disconnected from folks, right, and everybody else, and not being able to interact with people on a daily basis. So for me, that's some of the things I've been thinking about and how it pertains to my practice, and I've been looking at that and I came up with an idea for a future project dealing with that, and I call it Inuit non-practicing. Right, so I looking at images, looking at my works that I put together now, and looking at how I can develop a project under that title, right? I mean, whether it's a lack of food, whether it's a lack of speaking your own language, or trying to learn it, and other practices. For me, it's just trying to, I think, come to terms with that, and trying to, I think, deal with it. I think, and my practice has led me to think about that. And I think about the things that have gone on, the challenges around this pandemic, and the challenges of just living in what we call a normal life, right? So that's it.
Okay. Bonnie, I'll pull on you because I know that, I mean, your work also dealt with isolation so much, right? And sort of learning on our own. And there is this element of the pandemic, but also in terms of colonial history, how it's sort of isolated and separated. And
Yes. Yes. And I think also issues of scale. I think for me anyway, everything got really small. I was trying to manage just what I could handle on my table. And so the books are very small. The writing is tiny and cramped. The little presses that I was using, the plates that I was using to create those images were small. I remember when you wrote to me first of all and said, look, I'd like to look at that work. And I said, well, it's about 2 inches by 3 inches. I don't know how, because I couldn't, I couldn't control anything. And I was thinking, I think what I was trying to do was find a scale that wouldn't overwhelm my emotional capacity to deal with it. And so I needed to get really small. And I just want to mention Katherine's work talking about the demonstrations. This is big work, right? This is a big scale stuff. And I really admire that that ability to get a hold of that, because I have to say, when they announced those first 215 children who had been brought up or discovered in the ground, I stopped I couldn't make any more journals. I didn't know where to put that in a scale that I could manage. And I still can't, I'm still trying to grapple with even how to record that, even how to make images that will include that, because it seems to me that story, and of course the George Floyd story, the Black Lives Matter story, so many of this stuff is all implicated in what's happened to us with the pandemic. And I'm not sure how that is, but it feels like that to me. So yeah, for me, this has really been about how do I, because my work is usually really big, and all of a sudden it's really small, and I don't know. And then I think about Ruth's beads, and those are really tiny too, and the microscopic image, right? That kind of really zoning in to the really tiny, and how it makes me feel really tiny too, right? We're just like we don't know what is going on, and we don't seem to be able to get a hold of the real truth of the matter. Yeah.
Katherine, do you want to talk about your work? Because obviously you're looking at social protests.
Definitely. There's a lot of my photographic practice in my career that definitely captures very poignant moments of protests and demonstrations, but I also have created a lot of imagery about politics, even around, for instance, murder and missing Indigenous women, girls, Two-Spirit. I currently have some work in the National Gallery. There's a smoke grenade, and it represented the spirits. It was a red smoke bomb, and it was purposefully done in nature with it was an Indigenous woman, and she's wearing fishnets. Everything about it was intentional, and it was supposed to be a lot of my work. Like I said, it was just an extension of myself, and politics just ends up affecting every part of our lives. And it's a way to express, and a way to grieve, a way to honor, a way to share, spread awareness. There's a lot of my practice that I definitely want to open up conversations. I've received a lot of people tell me that they have learned something new with Indigenous peoples in Canada. My entire career since graduating NS has been geared towards educating about Inuit, about my personal experience as an urban Inuk, what contemporary means. I know there's a lot of people who have misconceptions and don't understand, or don't even know that Inuit are different from First Nations or Métis, or there's a big umbrella that everyone gets lumped into. And in order to continue to create and express and share parts of me, a lot of that will be political, and a lot of that does shine light on different areas regarding that.
Thanks. And Bea, how about you? Might need to unmute there.
Awkward, sorry.
It always happens.
Yeah, something very contagious about hearing everybody's work and seeing the work in the show is this kind of contagious, that's a bad pun to use in the context of a COVID talk, but just this sort of curiosity and I need to like look at what's going on, like in Bonnie's talk, like about the work, recording information, you know, and going and logging it, you know, what's happening, especially when something so new and historical is happening in real time and everybody's implicated collectively. It's so, like, you know, looking at masks on the ground, and Ruth's like so excited about the viruses, like looking for keywords and how things are and just going out, take pictures. It's something that I you know, it reminds me why I'm an artist, you know, like going and reacting, not reacting, but being in the moment with what's going on, and figuring out where, you know, you're placed in it as an individual and a group, you know, not always just trying to make sense of things that don't really make sense, you know. It's really remind me of the humanity in being an artist, or whatever it is we do. Sometimes I'm an artist, but sometimes I feel like all of me is art, that it's almost just something else. But yeah, just thinking about, you know, how so many qualities about being a maker and an observer and a communicator kind of help us through a situation like this. You know, because I spend a lot of time alone, or at least I did before. You know, I think, you know, we had a lot of time to think, a lot of time alone, a lot of time separated from each other. And I think as artists, we already do a lot of that. And so the work here and how it's made really, again, feeds a part of my humanity. And it makes me glad that this is what I do in life. And, you know, it's good to come back out of the water and look around and see what other people are made and what people have been thinking about and how that speaks to a situation, see the kind of relatable things. Anyway, I'm not really talking about myself, but it's more how it reaffirms, you know, going through something like this, it reaffirms, you know, the lifestyle that we have.
Thank you. And there's a line that I actually, in describing this exhibition, I talk about your work kind of providing this context for a novel virus, right? So the novel coronavirus. And when I wrote that, I really I had sort of been thinking about, Ruth, your work sort of as natural for this exhibition, given you would probably undoubtedly deal with coronavirus. But just, I was thinking immediately about your work just in terms of, you know, you've always been looking at context for these, you know, a virus basically, but also disease. And so, and really in this case, like providing, your work does give us a sort of really broad perspective on what's happening now with this particular virus. So, and just sort of placing it historically, right? So maybe, do you want to talk about that a bit?
Are you talking to me?
Yes.
Oh.
Yes.
Oh.
To you, Ruth. Yeah.
I'm on social media quite a bit. I used to be a professor, so I'm all into educating. And so I put up lots of things about decolonizing and a lot of stuff about coronavirus and how to protect yourself and all that kind of stuff. And one thing, when the pandemic started, this really has nothing to do with your question, but I'm going to continue anyway.
Totally fine.
When the pandemic started, I was like, okay, we're all going into lockdown. What am I going to post, you know? And so I've been watching News World day after day and watching Trudeau come out of his house and do the daily report. And so on Facebook and Instagram, I started the Trudeau Hair Report, on which I would report every day on his hair. And it became very popular, which was really weird. And so and people wanted to join my Facebook, so I had to put it on Instagram so people could follow without, because I like to keep my Facebook numbers down. So yeah, it just became very popular. And then I remember one day I missed it, so I had to do a little drawing, a really bad drawing of Trudeau, but people really liked it. And we all, so that's how I kind of got through that first lockdown, was having something to do every day that had nothing to do with beading, because beading is a very solitary thing, and I can only bead 4 hours a day for maybe 4 days a week. So I have a lot of downtime to think about things and stuff.
Sorry, my dog is jumping, finally making the leap. Thank you so much. A lot of you've actually sort of, my last question was kind of about what you think about, just given, you know, your reflection on artwork during this particular moment during the pandemic, but what you think now about what art can do. You know, we always talk about art in relationship to change and in terms of like documenting change. And that's obviously been a key part of this pandemic. And we've talked about how art is a form of resilience for those making it, but also for communities who are exposed to it. So I just wonder, you know, I know those words may or may not be in how you think about it, but just wondering, just given, you know, where we're at now, almost 2 years into it, you know, a few months away, just what you think about what art can do moving forward and at this moment. It's a more philosophical question.
I really hate these. What can art do? Well,
Well,
it's like, it's really, it can be pretty, it can be decorative. And what I'm noticing among museums and art galleries is they're trying to figure out how to get more people in. And I think part of that is a problem of our own making, I think, where we've taken art and kind of put it in this reverential space and doesn't talk to people. And I think with the pandemic, it's, I don't want to put words in other people's mouths, but it's kind of like we have become more human because we're all in the same thing. And so the work that we're doing also reflects how ordinary people are feeling. And one thing I've noticed is in the pandemic, there's more exhibitions online, so that you can have a greater audience than having it in a really expensive building.
yeah, it really did push us. If we thought, you know, we were heading in a digital direction, the pandemic has accelerated quite a bit, right? Anyone else have any thoughts on that? Catherine, you?
There we go. I had to unmute. I was thinking about the question. In my own lens, I definitely feel as if art has been a way to really help heal a lot of the traumas I've experienced in my life. During the pandemic, mental health has had a huge decline for everybody. And my brother had actually committed suicide. And I used art as a way to help my grieving process, to be able to create, to be able to express myself, as a way to not hold it inside, as a way, art for me, like I said, was an extension of myself, but more importantly, it's healing, and it's something that has definitely helped me get by and help me process, analyze. I definitely used it as a way to help me. So art is very, very art is very personal for me, and it's definitely a way to honor and to remember and to share.
So sorry for your loss, Catherine. And I think you spoke really eloquently to what art can do. Any final thoughts? Bonnie? No.
Not really. I extend my condolences to you, Catherine, for your loss. It's so dreadful. I believe what you said. You know, I don't want to add anything to what you said. I think art can heal, and I hope it can heal those people who look at it. But I know it can heal those people who make it. And so, yeah, thank you.
Bea or Barry?
I just wanted to thank you for bringing our work together, and really appreciate being in a group with so much meaningful work. And I want to send my condolences to you and your family, Catherine.
Well, maybe on that note, I don't see any questions from the audience. So perhaps we can end on that note. I'd like to thank you all for being with us tonight, and thank you to all of you who joined us. It's kind of perfect to have this at the end of the exhibition to sort of, to sort of bring you all together, actually. And I'm so thrilled you were all able to join us. And your work is all powerful and all poignant in different ways. And I do think it does give people just access to other people's experiences, right? So that way we can kind of see how we are collectively sharing this moment. So anyway, thank you all for joining us, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening and take care of yourselves. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Good night.